Deleted user. When I was about 13 or 14, I lived on a farm in NC. This wasn't a regular farm that you would expect with fields full of beans and shit. It was actually a pine tree harvestery. Pine needles are a big landscaping commodity, and so we lived basically in the woods and would bale the pine straw every year. Whatever. The point is that my house was in the middle of 550 acres of perfectly lined longleaf pines. My living room had a huge picture window. I won't go into the architecture of the house, but it was a weird custom job built by some dentist in the 30s. The window in the living room stretched nearly the entire length of the room, maybe 50 feet. The house was built on a subtle hill, so the living room itself sat 5 or 6 feet off the ground, so you had something of an angle to look out at a solid mile of pine trees. During the winter it was unsettling because you'd get just a bit of snow, enough to reflect moonlight so that you could see the dogs running around at night. I'll be honest, I hated that room and that window. So now to the relevant part. I had a cousin over for the weekend and we were doing what kids do in the country. Throwing stuff in the fireplace to see what happens. It is getting late and the fire is dying down, so we build the big kingdom of couch cushions and blankets in the living room and get ready for bed. Nothing out of the ordinary until we hear the dogs barking. They were really far away. The property stretches for nearly a mile, so I just assumed they were chasing off whatever animal felt like shitting in my yard. So my cousin is staring out the window and not saying anything, which prompts the standard, "What's up?" He just kind of keeps staring and says he feels like he's seeing things. Naturally I get all anxious and start staring out the window as well. Nothing happens for a few minutes and he gets more and more annoyed with me because I'm asking what he saw. He keeps shushing me so that he can focus. And then we both see it. A shadow of a person moves from one tree to the next. Not a run, not a leap, just a brisk walk from one tree to another. This is probably 100 yards out from the house. We can't actually tell if the person is coming closer or not because we're dealing with moonlight reflecting off of snow, slush, ice. I guess the crazy part is that we didn't so much freak out. Because at this point there is still that chance that we didn't see what we saw, you know. So we just kept staring. We should have gone to wake up my dad, but he's an idiot and the kind of guy to walk out on the patio and holler into the woods with his rifle. We were just scared enough to agree that we don't want to taunt whatever is happening. So about 3 minutes later, it happens again, but a good 50 feet from where we first saw it. Another person, another tree, a few strides and they were gone. This happened every few minutes for the next half hour, and we just stared. At this point I should mention that I didn't really have neighbors. The land surrounding our farm was federal paper. I don't know who owns it now, so it was miles and miles of uncultivated trees. You don't see people around the farm unless they intend to be there. So we keep watching as these two figures intermittently appear and vanish until finally we see one appear. But not disappear. Instead we focus in on it and see that it is now running forward. We lose our shit and go wake my dad. By the time we get into the room with my half-awake father, there is no one to be seen. We sprint around locking doors and windows. Keep in mind that we're out in the country with no one around. It rarely occurs to lock doors. Every door was worse than the last because you just know that as soon as you reach the door, someone is going to be trying to open it, although that never happened. We locked everything up, walked around the house at least 50 times making sure no one got in without us knowing, and then convinced my dad to fall asleep in the living room with us while we stared out the window. I never understood why my dad wouldn't call the police. He always had this, "we take care of our own" mentality, and it simply wasn't an option to call 911. The next day we went out to look and, absolutely, there were footprints everywhere in the snow. We saw them between trees and then we finally saw where someone had been standing right in front of the window. But as I said, I wouldn't have seen them because while I'm 7 feet up in the living room, they would have been right beneath me. Deleted user. I've told this story before, but this is an appropriate thread for it. One night when I was 13 years old I had gotten my period for the first time and ended up sleeping on my back. I am an avid side sleeper, so this is a really weird position for me. I was dreaming, and in that dream I was sitting in a chair. I leaned it back on its back legs, and suddenly the chair started to slowly lean further and further back until I drifted into the eternity below me. This freaked me out, and I jolted awake. When I awoke there was a figure leaning, hovering directly above my face, and all I saw was a hooded white, flat ovular and relatively featureless face with big ovular glassy eyes and an expression like it was determined to devour my eternal soul. The face was humanoid, very two-dimensional with thin, quivering angry lips and two holes where its nose would be, with eyebrows arched high up onto its forehead. I could feel an unworldly hate burning right through me as it loomed over me. It was absolutely the most helpless I have ever felt and would ever feel, because it was more than just my life I felt was at stake. I tried to move, scream, breathe, anything and couldn't. It was paralyzing me with its hate. I finally was able to let out the tiniest whimper, and as soon as the sound escaped me it stood straight up and paced back and forth at the foot of my bed, still staring. It was like a force field was erected around me, and the frustration of it trying to get at me again was radiating throughout the room. It looked like a starving tiger behind glass, longing to lunge at its vulnerable prey, if only it weren't for the barrier between us. It was tall, almost all the way to the ceiling tall, and very thin. Wearing a long black cloak that covered everything except that terrifying face. I realized that it hadn't been floating over me, it had stood at the foot of my bed and leaned over it to hover its face over mine. I sat up in my bed, still frozen, just staring at it. My closet door behind it was cracked a few inches, and it swooped in there and peered out at me, never having broken eye contact. It continued to stare, quivering with hate and frustration until it slowly faded away. I turned my light on and it stayed on at night for a long time. I never slept with that closet door open again, and I didn't sleep again that night. I stayed the night in the living room with all of the lights on, just sitting on the couch. I later dismissed it as sleep paralysis for several years. It was a very believable and plausible explanation. Then I became friends with a girl who confided in me and told me a story. She was up late at night by herself with her door open. Something out in the living room by the kitchen caught her eye, and when she looked at it, she saw a figure standing there, beckoning her to approach it. She looked away, refocused on it, and it was still there. When she described it, she described the exact same creature that had attacked me. We each got a sketchbook and drew what we saw, and when she showed me hers I was staring at my attacker all over again. She had never heard my story before telling hers. TLDR. Was attacked by a scary figure one night. Dismissed it as sleep paralysis until a friend described the exact same creature to me that had plagued her. She didn't know about my experience until after she had told me about hers. I'm having a hard time finding exactly what I saw, but this face is pretty similar. Just flatten the nose, cheekbones into nothing and close the mouth into a thin line with bigger, more rounded eyes.